Okay, good afternoon, everybody. For who is based in Asia, because for us it's still the time for the coffee. And welcome to our third milk tea corner. It's our tea corner dedicated to the Asian countries, and it's really a pleasure to have with us Rekpon Chung. It's really always a pleasure to have a conversation with Rekpon. We can spend hours. He has a lot of story to tell to us, but we have only 30 minutes. He has a lot of story because he is also member of the board of director of Ban Ki-moon Foundation. He was the expert, the high-level expert of the United Nations Secretary General, and has a lot of other role. He was a part of the PCC that won the Nobel Prize in 2007. So the list is very long, but we don't have time to explain all the activity involving Rek Wong Chung. The topic for today is very interesting because we want to discuss about the consumption base instead of a production base metrics for climate change. I don't want to say anything in addition because we have Raymond here and we can listen from his voice the detail of this proposal. Thank you, Raymond.
Okay, good morning or good afternoon, and hello from Seoul. I'm based in Seoul, Korea, and we just finished the BTS concert last week, and I have been involved in climate change business since 1991. In fact, I spent most of my lifetime attending from COP1 in Berlin and until the Paris in the 2015, and so on and on. And my feeling at the moment is that climate change, our global regime on climate change, is losing some kind of momentum. I think the reason comes from many sides. It's a geopolitical issues and many things. But typically, I want to highlight the issue that even that our climate regime designed by the UNFCCC and the Paris Climate Agreement itself has some kind of intrinsic dilemma and some limitations. Not many people highlighting this. So this is why I wanted to share my thoughts on this issue with Daniel before, and then I'd like to share with all of you. My point is that as you can feel that in spite of our huge effort over almost 3 decades since 1991, we are still struggling to make any kind of a tangible results. In fact, we have to confess that we have never been succeeded in uh, curbing down the emission. Global emission has been keep on rising in spite of all our so many talk and meetings and regimes we have talked about. I think there are many reasons why the fundamental limitations. And the one very fundamental limitations of our global climate regime under Paris Climate Agreement for me is that we are counting our carbon emission based on GDP. And this is strictly based on national boundary. And for example, China is responsible for the emission within their national boundary in the production process, which means the GDP. Many people think that this is very natural. And I think we have been taking it as for granted that this is very logical. But as we are living in a world where the trade volume is almost 1/4 of our consumption is composed of trade. In other words, 1/4 of our total goods are traded around the world. Typically, the case of China and Europe is very typical. Europe is importing much of the carbon-intensive products and consume within the national boundary, while China is producing most of the carbon-intensive product in their own territory, and they're exporting it. And very interestingly, China is finger-pointed to be a culprit and responsible for all the production they are making, in spite of the fact that They are not consuming all of it. And much of the Chinese manufactured goods are consumed all around the world. In other words, China is a factory of the world. And then still China is responsible for all the emission from their manufacturing. I think this issue is making it a little bit very complicated. In other words, when we are pushing the emission reduction based on production, so we are blaming producing and exporting country, while we are not asking importing and consuming country to share the responsibility. In other words, Europe and United States importing much of the cheap Chinese manufactured goods and consuming in their own territory. But the responsibility for the carbon emission from those imported goods has to be borne by China. So this is the current situation. This is triggering a very intrinsic problem. Number one, in order to curb or reduce carbon emission based on GDP, that means that the production has to be reduced. Of course, I know that you can improve the efficiency. That's true. But a market competition where the price, cheapest price winning the market, it is not always easy to win by simply improving the efficiency. So when with the Paris Climate Agreement is imposing the burden only on producing and exporting countries. But typically China, but it's not only China. Most of the developing countries are producing and exporting manufacture manufacture goods because nowadays, like a rich country like European Union, you are not much producing too much manufactured goods. Rather, you are exporting software or design or insurance or finance. So the industrial structure is completely different. And so under the circumstances, the question is the pushing down the pressure on producing and exporting country. I don't think that it is very effective, and I don't think it can be effective in the future as well, because these countries, for them, exporting their manufactured goods is a kind of their lifeline to get the soft currency to import for their other uh, very vital goods for their own survival. So this is the current situation. Then the question is, how can you introduce a regime where the responsibility of a carbon reduction or carbon emission can be equitably shared between consumer and the producing country? I think this is something I believe not much has been discussed so far in our design of a global climate regime. So this is one of the more very fundamental issue we often forget to discuss, and especially within the UN FCCC process or Paris Climate Agreement process, this issue has been almost never been touched, as far as I remember. So I'd like to share this issue, and I'd like to have your view on this issue. How can you solve this problem in a more cooperative and more conducive manner? This is the agenda I'm trying to share with you. Okay, I'll start here.
Thank you, Rekon. Very exciting introduction, very interesting. You, in some way, underline two different layers of the problem. One is the point of the general accounting, from the production base and the consumption base, and we know very well that the leakage in this moment is very important. The terms of leakage, carbon embedded, it's very crucial terms, in particular with the use of CBAM, for example, in Europe. But one important point is also the dimension that you underline. So the embedded carbon from China to US is the same amount, more or less, of the Italian emission. So it's a huge amount of emission. So this is a very crucial point. But the second very interesting part of your proposal is to move from the national determined contribution to the personally determined contribution. So it's not only with brackets to consider the consumption-based approach metrics, but is also to download this kind of approach to the single citizen. Can you articulate this part, please?
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So, following from the production consumption issue, when we focus on the consumption issue, naturally we have to focus more on who is the actual entity for the consumption. Actually, it is individual consumers. And when we talk about NDC, it is based on the nation, based on nation. And but what do we mean by nation is in a way a little bit abstract. But for the consumption, and it is, we have to talk about the issue of how to engage the consumers. And during the 3 decades of since UNFCCC 1992, we have been mainly focusing on the role of the government and the role of the business. And often we forget to highlight the issue, the responsibility of the consumers, how they can share the responsibility. Because we have been talking about NDC, which is a national responsibility, but how this national responsibility can be broken down into the level of individual consumers. So this is another, I'm calling it bottom-up approach. We have been so far top-down, and this top-down has been also very clear limitations because the government not always, for the government's priority, climate change is not the only number one priority. For them, there are many other priorities. So at the national government level, we have been always appealing to the government, oh, you have to put higher price on climate change. But we can appeal more directly from the bottom up, and the consumers has to understand that they have to share the responsibility by themselves instead of finger pointing government or just a business. Many environmental movement has been finger pointing government and blaming business. But not in many cases, we have been failing to finger pointing ourselves because it all happened because we are failed to share the cost of renewable energy or green energy transition because we are always expecting government to share the price or the cost and the business to share the responsibility. But we have not sufficiently thought about how we can share the responsibility. So I'm actually proposing the idea of me first campaign. I'm teaching young students that you should be promoting me first campaign, which means that you should be ready to pay higher price for green energy and the green product. So if you are ready to pay for it, extra money, then I think we can solve the problem. So I think just a finger pointing government and business, I think will not solve the problem, but rather we have to wake up all the consumers that we consumers has to come forward to share the price. And we just not waiting for the government and business to sell. So this is I call me first campaign and consumption-based bottom-up approach. But how we can organize it, I think it's open-ended question. And I know that there are in Europe, there are many movements. I know there are many social, civil society movement there. But in order to actually activate me first campaign and the consumer sharing the responsibility, one of the main, my idea is that we have to have a price differentiation between carbon energy and the carbon free energy, and also carbon product and the carbon free product. So we have to differentiate the market so that consumers can choose from carbon product or carbon free product. Of course, we have green product, we have green labeling, many this kind of environmental labeling is there, but the environmental labeling and carbon free labeling is a little different for me. Carbon free is a little bit more very clear, easy to label it, certifying it rather than just a green environmental product. So how can we produce introduce a system where we can uh, put different price between carbon energy product and the carbon-free energy product. This is the key issue, and then consumers should be ready to choose carbon-free energy and product, even though they could be more expensive. I know that in Europe, this to a certain degree, this kind of approach has been already working in some European countries, but there is an exception rather than just a common practice in other countries. Other than Europe, in many other countries, in developing world especially, this is not happening at all. So this is a new way out to share the responsibility with the consumers, not only just government business. Yeah, I'll
Very
start here.
interesting. I already have another comment. So before to share another comment, I like to open the floor to the participant, underlining the two levels that we just summarized, the different metrics from production to consumption, and the different approach in terms of level of engagement, capacity to show the engagement of the people. Any question from the floor? Comments? I don't see none for the moment. So my comment, record the first time that you explained the idea to make more expensive renewable energy. You remember, no? We were discussing together
Yeah.
and say, no, no, this is, is wrong because we need to facilitate the sale of energy. Then I start to think later, and I found very interesting this proposal because when you mention Europe, in some way you are mentioning the guarantee of origin of we called also RECs, renewable energy certificates in other country. So where the company decided voluntarily to pay more renewable energy instead to pay cheaper fossil fuel energy. So at the beginning it was very strange for me to accept the idea, but then I found a very interesting, provocative, but also interesting approach with the idea to show how I can engage myself. I can show to the market that I'm engaged in the process. And the idea that I'm available to pay more in some way is also applicable for the normal contract that we have with a energy producer. No, I found very very interesting. Did you have any other experience in other countries in this direction?
Yeah, actually, I think I can suggest you as one of the marketing strategy. For example, in a consumer industry, um, let's think about, for example, the easiest example could be, let's think about Coca-Cola or Starbucks. If Coca-Cola say that we will use only green energy and we will put a little higher price for the green energy Coca-Cola, and they want to compete with the Coca-Cola, the Pepsi-Cola, and they say that Coca-Cola is carbon free, even though I'm not sure in Europe. Europe, you say that in some cases, green energy could be even cheaper. But in many other developing countries, that's not the case. Not because of only the green, solar energy production cost could be cheaper only for the production. But transmission and grid connection, all this investment is not over the storage, is not reflected. So when all these components are factored in, actually the green energy is still a lot more expensive in many developing countries, including in Korea. Green energy is much, much more expensive because of storage and because of a grid connection issue. If Coca-Cola comes to Korea and they said, oh, we will buy green energy at a higher price. Actually, it is more expensive in Korea. So they can say that, oh, we will use only green energy for Coca-Cola production. But we will put higher price. But Coca-Cola is carbon free. So they put carbon free Coke on the market and compete with the Pepsi Cola and let the consumer choose. I think many of the youngsters will be willing to choose Coca-Cola if it is carbon free. Of course, we have to certify them. So this is a kind of new approach of giving a choice to the consumers. It can be even Starbucks. Starbucks can say that, oh, we are going to pay a higher price for green energy, and we'll put 3 cents or 5 cents more for the coffee price. And if you are worried about climate change, you come to Starbucks. And I think it can be a very powerful marketing tool in some countries. I'm not sure, not in all countries, but if there is a proper public campaign, I think it can be a very powerful marketing tool. So this is one way of what I'm talked about price differentiation, and this can be very strong marketing tool in the consumer industry.
Yeah, yeah. Always, if you have a comment, please raise your hand up your microphone. You're always welcome. And touching this last point, you connected the Me First campaign and in some way to give value to the choices of people. And also, you underline the need to have a communication because this really should be a kind of mass campaign. So everybody need to share this view all together in order to also to have the possibility to create some revenue for this kind of mechanism. At the same time, there are two critical aspects in this process, is the labeling and the cost. I mean, we need to have credibility in the system, so the labeling should be very, very reliable, and we are very expert on carbon footprint of product here. There is a lot of expert in this meeting. At the same time, the definition of the cost is a very another critical point because in one country you can have 10 cents, another country could be 5 cents. So how you do you think this should be the market to regulate this kind of cost or some kind of external pressure?
Actually, when I was speaking to young students, even in Uzbekistan, a very poor country, in Kazakhstan, even in any other country, when I am speaking to a young student, you might be, I mean, in Europe maybe even better, but even in those poor countries, they raise their hand. They say that if there is a carbon-free Coca-Cola and more expensive, but still they are willing to pay and drink carbon-free Coca-Cola. And the certification issue is for this kind of case, I think it's relatively easy because Coca-Cola has to prove that they are consuming and buying green energy from the green energy, solar energy producers. So it can be relatively easy to certify so they can directly buy and they show it to the consumers. So even in more than 50, 60% of the students say that they are willing to pay a higher price to drink carbon-free Coca-Cola. So this means that this kind of marketing can work for the future generation.
Yes, another point is that you just mentioned younger generation, so the capacity to engage the citizen, the people in this kinds of initiative. At the same time, at the beginning of your intervention, you start with the idea of the metric at the international level. You mentioned that UNFCCC is counting the production-based metric. And do you have any, because this kind of conversation at international level is also going since a long time, no? But it's only a kind of academic discussion. Do you believe that there is any opportunity, any possibility to have a kind of double matrix, double counting, no, double counting is not the right
Yeah,
term, double matrix at the
yeah, yeah.
level?
Actually, one of my mentee, Dr. Postdoc lady, she prepared article on uh, how to put this idea into practice. So we have discussed, and then the basic idea is consumers and the producers should have a shared responsibility, which means, for example, China should be responsible for the value added. In other words, of the amount of the China exporting. So they could create a certain amount, $1 million of added value. So they should be responsible for that portion. But in Europe, for example, if Europe has imported it, and then the importer in Europe is selling it at a higher price. So the importer in Europe is also creating certain added value by selling it in Europe. So there are certain portion of added value. And there are added value in China, added value in Europe, importers. So the responsibility of carbon emission could be shared based on the ratio of the value added. For example, as you might heard that you might remember that China said that they are exporting and manufacturing all those very expensive luxury fashion goods items like Gucci, Christian Dior, but their actual added value in China is very small. But the selling price is very high in Europe and the United States. So the responsibility can be shared based on the amount of the added value. Can be a kind of solution, and it can be easily, you can prepare an equation to how we can share the responsibility. And actually, we have prepared an article, and we are now thinking about publishing it in one of the journals, and we are looking for that. If you are interested, I can share the article with you.
Sure, we can share with all the participants of the Milk Tea Corner. And so in some way, the double counting is also an
Well,
acceptable
double
move.
counting is also, yeah,
Eh,
double
eh,
counting is also a very serious issue. And in this article, my mentee, she prepared very interesting how to avoid the double counting. So I can share the article with you.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, double
But the
counting
point,
is also another very technical issue, but I didn't talk about it because we don't have enough time for that.
yeah,
So
sure, sure.
yeah.
No, we are sorry, we are going very deep in the conversation, so I understand that we can stop in some moment to go
Mm.
deeper. But in some way, the point that you mentioned before, to have this kind of different, the combination of the metric, the shared responsibility, is a kind of translation of what is already happening in the business sector, where you have the producer and then you have the consumer or you have the value chain, and you have the consideration of scope 3, the indirect emission that is part of the responsibility of the final producer of the product. So in some way what you describe in terms of relationship between countries is a kind of mirroring of what is already happening at the business level.
Mhm. Yeah. But actually, I have a little concern about the CBAM, which is introduced by the European Union. And the CBAM is, from European point of view, it's a very interesting idea. But from the point of how can you share the responsibility between the two sides, the CBAM is simply placing the responsibility mainly on the producers. So it's making the situation worse. So I think we needed to have a more academic research how we can avoid the more negative side effect from the CBAM.
Yeah. No, CBM is another key topic, and it deserves to have a very long conversation. And
Mhm.
I also agree with you that the idea is very interesting, but the way that was implemented has a lot of critical aspects, in my view.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
any comments from the participants or no? And do you expect that no, your explanation is very interesting in terms of research, academic views, and vision. But do you expect that some concrete step forward could happen at the political level or at the social level?
Yeah, me first is or price differentiation can be done by the government because the government is holding the ultimate authority of the price differentiation or taxation. But even the business can introduce a new marketing, as I told you, like a Coca-Cola case. It's not actually renewable energy 100% in a way, it is also a kind of approach by the business to introduce this kind of idea, but they are not specifically putting a different price on the. They are not differentiating the carbon product and carbon free product. They are not doing that yet. So actually, it's a little fuzzy. But I think it is a lot better for the. It can be introduced by the business as a marketing strategy, and also by the society, the civil society, the Me First campaign, and also from the government level at the UNFCCC level. I think how we can share the responsibility between the producer and the consumer has to be discussed at the top level or Paris Climate Agreement level. But so far, I don't think it has been discussed yet. So I think that this is something we have to have some kind of a seminar or expert panel meetings before the issue to be brought into the global the political level. I think we need some kind of academic level discussion before we move on to political level.
Okay, thank you, Ray Chung. The 30 minutes of our conversation is already gone. It was very a pleasure to have a chat with you. I like to remind that the next Milk Tea Corner will be the 21st of May, and will be the speaker from Kazakhstan, Aidar Yesenbayev. And the topic is From Talk to Action, Turning Conference Insights into Climate Impact in Central Asia. So we will move from South Korea to Kazakhstan this time. So thanks again, Ray Chung, and see you soon to the next Milk Tea Corner. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.